Also, the speaker want to make some questions or comment, you can use the chat, but also you can raise your hand and make your comments or question directly, no problem at all. So feel free to participate in the discussion, of course. To start, I have two main questions for our speakers, yes, I propose these topics. The one is we have seen many challenges regarding the secondary use of data, also regarding high consent. I would ask our speakers which is the priority area they consider that should be addressed in order to have a secondary use of data that is respectful of the autonomy of the individual, of the study participants, and also let's say, inequitable, that supports equity in the participation in clinical trials and also in healthcare assistance. So my first question is quite broad and it's related to how is a priority area to address in this field, regarding especially the secondary use of data, after having listened to all your presentation. And the second is related to the country interpretation of the GDPR and also regarding the high consent. I would ask, since you are from from different countries and different expertise, I would ask you which is your experience if in your country you can, for example, ask for a broad consent or decide which kind of consent a person can choose within some experience, and so to tell us which is the situation in your country according to your experience you had made regarding the secondary use and also regarding the form of consent to secondary use. If you can use broad consent, if you can use many different kind of consent, or if you have to use a specific consent related to the single trial in which a person take part. And these are the first two questions that I have. Then I have other one, but I would ask you to respond. Who wants to take the question as first speaker and then? Rosalba?
Okay, just my little experience about the implementation of the electronic informed consent in Italy, because we don't have yet the broad informed consent. In fact, I just like to ask the other speakers how far they think we are in Europe from the complete implementation of the broad informed consent, because for instance, in Germany, perhaps we have just something like that. But as far as I know, in France, there's no possibility, as in Italy and likewise in Spain. So we are, I think, still far from having the patients. Professor Casali was saying the patient is not free to give his consent to utilization of their data gathered in clinical trials for other uses. So my experience about the electronic informed consent was limited to the pilot study we did, because we asked firstly to our ethics committee if we could, firstly we asked the Italian Agency of Medicine if we could implement a remote informed consent in Italy, and they said yes, you can, and this was last year. And we should just implement in the protocol, write in the protocol that you want to use a web app. And then the ethics committee could give authorization to use it in a clinical trial. The problem in there, I think, is more technical, because as far as I know, and I don't know if someone can ask to this question, the problem is that if we use a web app like iConsent, this is considered a device. And the device should be firstly approved because there are many characteristics that in its implementation, so it's authorization, it cannot be used without first approval. So in the pilot study, we did not use actually iConsent for asking the consent to the patients, but just paper and pencil. And this app was just used for evaluation. So actually, we don't have any experience in real clinical trials for the implementation. But I know, as far as I know, we could present a protocol in which we want to use a web app.
Thank you, Rosalba. Does anybody want to comment on this regarding the Italian situation? Otherwise,
I confirm what said by Rosalba Micheli, and I know experience with e-consent in Italy, and I don't know. Okay.
thank you. Irene, I saw you raised your hand, and that's also
Yes,
the
so
Spanish
for us,
experience.
So what you have seen is that there is a lot of controversy in Spain. So our surprise, for example, regarding our ethics committee, that I didn't give feedback, our legal department first contacted the legal representative of the ethics committee, and actually she was against having the electronic informed consent. It was not for the type of signature, but it was more on not meeting all the rights for the patient. But he said, we know that there are other members of the ethics committee that are very keen on implementing it. So we think that, she told us, like, as a whole, I only have one vote. So it would probably get approved by the ethics committee without any, let's say, any major issue. But we could see that there was already concerns from the legal part, the legal party of the ethics committee. But at the end, the limitation was not the, let's say, on the signature on the platform. At the end, we faced a decision from our policymakers on the secondary use of data, of the data that is inside the medical records. And basically is that data cannot be used, cannot be exported, cannot be done anything with it. It's not the same, I think, in all the regions, and the regulation, let's say, depends on the regions and the authority they have on data protection. So maybe in other areas it might be possible, but for us, something that really concerns me is how, as the stakeholders, patients, researchers, can advocate to provide flexibility, always ensuring that the data, there is transparency in the use of that data, that it's an ethical use, that it's not a commercial use, but how to avoid this extreme limitation on the secondary use of data that really limits research.
Thank you, Irene. Paolo Casali.
My feeling is that any ethics committees today take legal stands and the like, giving up looking at the, for example, in this case, at the information process, which should be their duty. Because, I mean, the electronic consent cannot be, I mean, accepted or not in principle. Electronic consent is a tool. In theory, an ethics committee should look at how that tool is implemented actually in the institute, and then okay, saying yes or no on the basis of whether I mean, the information process is appropriate or not, in as a matter of fact, not in principle. I mean, my feeling is that more and more ethics committees today are, I mean, have been converted into legalistic bodies, which tend to give, of course, not all of them, but which fail to fulfill their duty, which is looking at the processes, looking at the reality of at what happens in reality. Don't you believe this?
Cinzia, you are muted.
You have raised your hand, Rosalba. This is the old one.
Yes, no, I raised it just to ask, because in one discussion with our Italian agency of medicine, they said that the problem is that actually, as Paolo Casali was saying, that when you use an electronic tool, you don't have the possibility to properly inform the patients because you are not face to face. And this is a disadvantage because actually an informed consent process should make the patient able not only to understand what is written in the protocol, but to implement also the trustness with the researchers. And this is, I think, that an electronic instrument cannot actually is not able to implement this kind of trustness between researchers and patients. So this is a big advantage related to this kind of use. So perhaps the ethics committee won't be able to accept the electronic instruments because of not for the technical problems or because the signature is not able and they cannot identify the patients because the patients can be identified easily, but it's just a problem of not having the patients behind. It's just destroying this trustness between the two actors.
Thank you, Rosalba. Irene
Yeah,
Bragna?
But for me, something that surprised me when we discussed the DART project with the Spanish agency is that actually their point was, well, now we do all bank transactions with electronic signatures, with biometric signatures, and nobody is considering that you are not the person doing it. So why do you do this? And you cannot do it with your health decision. So it's when I saw, like, it's true. Like years ago, we might say that we would not trust to have a biometric signature to have, but as Mirko was saying, like the technology, the signature that we are using is not any kind of signature, so the level of security is high. The other part regarding the process, and if you remember discussing with the team from Heidelberg, so there are ways in which we can document how we are interacting. So during COVID, we saw that we were able to do more remote health than what we thought. And what I like from the regulation is what they say, the patient can decide if he or she wants to do electronic informed consent or not. For example, for us, for the basket of baskets, we were not thinking on the first consent in which you want to see the patient, want to explain the clinical trial, want to have that human interaction. But there are moments, so for example, patients that were coming from Portugal, would have been nice to see them first online, to discuss, I think we would have been able to even find this first informed consent, and things such as covering the cost would have been included because they were already in the clinical trial. So I think that with the COVID, and especially in regions such as Lombardia, Barcelona, Madrid, in which we suffer a lot and we needed to be very creative, we have seen that it's not as difficult as we thought to document the remote health process.
Thank you, Irene. Christoph Schicker.
Yes, thank you very much. I can just report my ideas from Germany. And in concerning the question, what priority should we have and focus on? One idea that I have is that we need to avoid reinventing the wheel every project that we are carrying out. So I think we need to build, at least at a national level, infrastructures and procedures that are standardized and harmonized throughout the whole country. Because there are a lot of pilot studies and initiatives, but not each clinical trial can meet all the requirements and all what is desirable in terms of ethics and participation, all that stuff. So I think, in my basic understanding, the clinical trial will always be conducted at a local site, for example, at the Istituto dei Tumori di Milan. And there you need, of course, some physician-patient contact to ask for consent for participation in that trial. And then you generate the data in the trial. But the question is, at what point you can use national infrastructures for the data storage and data sharing. And I think that it shouldn't be the case that each study and each institution have its own procedures. I think at some point the study and the principal investigators should store the data in a national storage, national data repository, and then there should be some harmonized procedures to allow researchers to ask for access to the data, and a procedure then to check and to revise or to supervise the access request, for example, by a data use and access committee or by a data steward, together with patient participation, and then warrant access to the data to single identified researchers. I think it's not feasible that we make secondary use of data with each project and each institution having its own procedures and infrastructures and all that stuff.
Thank you. I think it's a bit challenge, but Paolo Casali and then Irene Bragna again.
No, but just a question about remote consent. I mean, we are doing more and more televisits in oncology, for example, second opinions. So do you really believe that, for example, a remote consent on the secondary use of your data is more challenging than a televisit, a second opinion in oncology by which you may decide what to do of your life in your future. This is my only question. I mean.
Thank you. I leave the question for discussion for the speaker. Irene Bragna and then Claudia Aluati.
Yes, so I agree. And that's what I said. Like with COVID, we were able to see that first, that the healthcare systems were able to create the resources to ensure this remote health. And I did my training in Canada where remote health was much more implemented, and that was back then in 2011. So we saw it, and there were challenging conversations that you have in the clinic, and it's like much easier to have a conversation on secondary use of data. Totally agreeable, and certain things that, for example, the investigator from Heidelberg, the PI, was suggesting is like, okay, we need to document on informed consent, like the questions that the patient is asking, or that to prove that there is this interaction, and it's technically feasible. So I completely agree. Regarding Christoph's proposal, I think it's a great proposal, and I think as stakeholders, we should aim to achieve that. I don't know how it's in Germany and with the more federated country, but for us in Spain, it's challenging enough. Yes, with the regional divisions. But the second part is, for example, we have a network of the fully public health hospitals, like that has no foundation attached. And is that one, the one that depends directly from the government, the one that cannot have any secondary use of data, because the problem, as you mentioned, is that they haven't done a proper standardization process. There are no experts evaluating this safety. It has been more of a political decision. Data from patients cannot be accessed because they can be sold. And that was the speech, and it was a political decision. So actually, every time that we do secondary use of data, it's not directed from the medical records, is on CRFs from clinical trials, is in databases approved by the ethics.
Thank you, Irene. Claudia, sorry, we lost you. We lost you, Irene, for very few seconds.
Oh, no, but the idea is like, I totally agree with Christoph, but we should probably need to educate as stakeholders, the policymakers.
Thank you. Claudia Luati.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back to what Paolo was saying. I think this is precisely the crux of the issue, you know. I mean, sharing your data in the context of a telemedicine consultation is not the same as having your data, feeling that your data is out there being used for you don't know what, you know. So it's really the question of how the data is used that I think is at the basis of the trust of citizens, and a question that needs to be solved in order to ensure that citizens want and patients want to share their data. So I think, you know, what Irene was, I think it was Irene was saying, I think this flexible approach is really important. Remote digital can be a very excellent tool in some contexts. In other contexts, it won't be. I think we have to recognize, you know, that there will still be some areas where the personal relation will be important. And again, reflecting back on the results of the old trials, of the Trials at Home project last week, I was very surprised, you know, that a lot of patients decided whether to join a clinical trial just based on a conversation with their healthcare professional, with their clinician, you know, with the person that follows them on a daily basis, and they feel they trust and would follow their recommendation. And for that, I think you still need that human aspect. So remote and digital is very relevant in some cases, but obviously, you know, it has to be adapted to the patient, to what they're willing to accept, and to the situation also. And just a final word, you know, I mean, I think it's very concerning in terms of the variability of the implementation across member states. I mean, I think this is in the end what the European Health Data Space was trying to address, really, this providing a kind of a European level guidance on application of certain GDPR principles, especially in the health space. But in the end, we'll see, I think, that there will still be a lot of national variability in terms of implementation of the opt-out. And for me, this is concerning in the sense that not every patient has the same rights and will have the same information, you know, at national level. And I think this is something that we need to address and really continue advocating for.
Thank you very much, Claudia. Now I see Paolo Casali and then Christopher.
So just to invite everyone to think that informed consent doesn't mean that you protect privacy necessarily. I mean, privacy should be protected, full stop. You may give or not your informed consent, but I mean, this is not I mean, the two things are completely different. I mean, the specificity of the informed consent has more to do with the human right, the civil right of the patient to decide what will happen about his or her data than with privacy. Privacy should be protected, that's it. So, I mean, giving an informed consent doesn't mean that privacy will be protected. Not giving an informed consent doesn't mean that privacy will be challenged. I mean, we should have laws, rules, and whatever you want to protect privacy, full stop. It's somewhat, I mean, it's something which is not so easy, I think, to catch, but we have given the informed consent as far as the secondary use of data is concerned a meaning which I think has so much to do with privacy, while probably should not have to do with privacy, should have to do with the civil right of anyone to decide what use of your data is made. Having said that, maybe some governments, for example, may believe that there is a social interest to protect, which may even prevail over the individual interest. No, for example, this may be the reason why cancer registries have a derogation from any consent of the patients, because there is a social value to protect. But I mean, we should never assume that protecting or not privacy depends on the informed consent of the patient. I mean, we should protect privacy. That's it.
Thank you, Paolo. Christoph Schickert.
Yeah, so some brief remarks concerning Irene. Well, I certainly, first of all, do not want to suggest that Germany is at the forefront of digitalization, neither in the primary health sector nor in the secondary data research use. So I think there are other European countries like Scandinavia countries, Finland or Denmark, who are at the forefront. And we have some ideas and some initiatives. We still not know if they will ever fly or work. Second point is, well, I agree with Paolo and you saying that we need some kind of flexibility. If you have the patient in the clinical trial, you may offer him or her different things concerning the use of the data. So first, there will only be use of the data within that clinical trial. Second, we can ask the patient to give consent for further broad use of the clinical trial data. I think that is ethical, okay. We can also think about offering the patient to recontact each time that some project requires his or her data for secondary use. And I understand that from some perspective, from patient participation and informed consent, that might be the ideal world solution to recontact always. But we should also be aware that this means huge costs in terms of efforts and infrastructure costs. And also, at least from empirical studies, we know that there are many patients who do not want to be recontacted all the time to give consent to each project. They are okay with giving a one-time broad consent for the secondary use of their data. There are different ways, and I would, to some extent, agree with Paolo that we should not exaggerate with consent, and there is also there always needs to be a governance that to be there and to warrant transparency and data protection and responsible use and all that stuff with further review bodies and so on. So it's not only about consent, I think. You shouldn't focus too much on consent because consent also can create a lot of resource costs and hurdles. And we need to at least be aware of that.
Rosalba?
No, just say that, so we should perhaps push on make the broad consent active in all Europe because perhaps this could, at least for some studies, not for clinical trials, of course, but if we want to avoid all such problems, perhaps we as researchers, or we could go to the governments, to the European institution, and then push for having the broad informed consent. But my, sorry, phone calling. My question is regarding what Christopher really was discussing before, the data sharing, that actually we have the possibility, or at least in 2031, the possibility to have the data uploaded in the European health data space. That is a way to make the data available for the patients, of course, but also perhaps for the researchers. And I was wondering if, because at least I think that the data are not informative per se, but the usefulness of the data depends on how they are organized. So for us as researchers, how, perhaps this is a question for Claudia, how this space, European space, could be useful for research if we could find there some data that we can actually actionable for the research, to implement studies, for instance, for obtaining, for me that I'm working with clinical trials, to build perhaps control arms or build models for synthetic controls. So I'm wondering if this space could be actionable for us.
Yes, Claudia, of course. Claudia, please.
Yeah, I can reply. I mean, I think this is precisely the objective, indeed, to make it as comprehensive as possible and to have as many data sources as possible and high quality data as well. You know what Christophe was describing in terms of those governance bodies. I mean, I think this is really what the data access bodies will be about, is really ensuring that we have the framework in place and they will act as gatekeeper between the researchers trying to access the data and then this data pool, you know, that will be available where all this health data will be collected. I mean, it's a great idea on paper, and I think it has a lot of potential. The only thing is, of course, implementation is not going to happen tomorrow. You know, I mean, European member states are at very different stages in terms of their digitalization and trying to create first their national data spaces. So I think this is definitely something to keep in mind and that will be useful in the future. And I very much hope that in this context it will be. But of course, you know, this might not solve your problems right now.
Well, thank you, Claudia. I would just make a comment about this because, as you said, the health data space requires also governance and also a dialogue and a public dialogue on what is the meaning and the value of data. We talk about common goods and benefits from the society, but I think that we have not many spaces to discuss this kind of topics, in some countries at least. But since the European Health Data Space regulation should be applied, I think, in each country, maybe what is missing is that a space to have a dialogue, to define priorities, and also a governance. And in the governance, how to include citizens that could bring another point of view from that of researchers. So how can we do that? We build this kind of this is a very little space, but we are trying to do this, talking about secondary use of data. So Claudia and then Alexander, please.
Yeah, just to briefly complement what I was mentioning. Indeed, as part of the regulation, you know, there is a component related to governance, you know, and creating that body that will have to ensure that governance. And I think a lot of stakeholders are expected to be part of it. Whether that will translate at national level into inclusive governance bodies is I think a different question. But as you say, you know, there are different governments at the moment in Europe that also creates a lot of distrust potentially. There is a lot of misinformation, you know, about health, and I think it's really important to ensure that we have the buy-in of the citizens and of the patients for these initiatives on broader data uses, because otherwise we're just fueling conspiracy theories basically. And having that governance and having that debate, I think, is very important, as you say.
Thank you, Alexander. Yes, Ishi?
Yes, thank you. And just to add a maybe more pragmatical point of view and technical point of view on the matter, once you're talking about national databases, one of the main challenge, I mean, after you've put on the governance and let's say the frame, is how to structure the data that could be easily reused for clinical research, for academic projects, and for having worked on several working group on that subject. It's a real big challenge, especially when you're talking to center hospital that do not have only oncology on their mind, and they have also to address cardiology and other field of medicine. So something to keep in mind. It's not because you have a space to share data that you have clean data to put in it.
Thank you, Alexander. That's you're right. Mirko Orsini, and I think this would be our last intervention. Thank you, Mirko.
Yeah, just 2 comments. The first one is on the use of remote informed consent in my vision, the use of this kind of digital tool is not for substituting the normal informed consent process, but can enable a more informed consent for patient, giving, for example, more time after a face-to-face meeting with the clinician, the researcher, to think about, to talk with their relatives, and to understand better what are the objectives of the trial. So it's not a substitution of the traditional informed consent process, but can enable more informed consent for patient, and they can also give them more opportunities to ask support to physician on what are the objective of the trial and the opportunity and the potential problem of participating in a trial. The second one, I completely agree with Alexander on the difficulty to have a national system, information system that collects all the data. This is not the reality. We have a lot of different electronic records, information system, laboratory system, registries, CRF for clinical trial, a lot of different systems that have to interoperate, and we need to integrate data already collected for that system. We have to harmonize that data with standard procedure, with standards, and we have to enable this system to collect data and to transmit data to European health data space and to national health data space in order to have a large quantity of data to be potentially used with the consent of patient for research.
Thank you. Now I will leave the floor to Rosalba Miceli and leave the floor to her for the conclusion also. So Rosalba,
yes, no,
please.
just a comment about data sharing again, but because for instance, if I think about cancer patient, yes, we can establish standard for baseline data and the patient's characteristics of the tumor and the initial treatments and so on. But if I think about the follow-up of patients, this is something that cannot be standardized because the tumors are all different. We have different scheduling of follow-up. We have different treatments. So establish a database that is collecting this kind of data is very difficult. I think that we could put together the data that are fixed to at a time point, like baseline data, and this is a problem. There are many issues, but perhaps we in the time of the future we could manage this. But putting together follow-up data for at least cancer patients is not feasible, in my opinion. And this is a problem because if we would want to establish which kind of treatments, for instance, are more are better, that the patients fare better according to treatment, this cannot be established using public databases like these repositories Europe are thinking. This is just to make the last comment. I just have, if I can, I don't know if I can now. I can remember how to share the slides. Perhaps if no, you can't see anything.
Not in the presentation mode. You are in the mode of a speaker.
Speaker mode. How can I do? I can remember exactly. Okay, just
So try again, but switch up in.
Perhaps I have to, no. If I share the screen, then I go to the presentation.
Just share the presentation, not your full screen.
Just because it's I try to be quick, because this is just to make the points, the final points, the highlights, because we have
or like this, it's fine.
Is it okay? No, well, the key highlight in this workshop is that the remote informed consent elicitation and secondary data use are strictly related, because the informed consent digitized and documented the decision of patients to participate, and the secondary use extended the initial decision by governing how the data may be reused. So the continuous governance is necessary from enrollment to reuse of data. And the two share also ethical foundation, the principle of autonomy, transparency, accountability that some of the speakers pointed out. And from the patient point of view, we have listened that the ethics implies a close relationship and collaboration between patients and researchers. And also we have seen that the way information is communicated to the patient and consent is obtained at the start determine how the data can later be used. And this calls also for a culture of trust and understanding around the secondary data use. Also, we have some regulatory alignment, and we have the core rules from GCP, European and GDPR that regulates informed consent in general and electronic informed consent and data reuse. And the remote consent help document compliance with the data protection and also clinical trial regulation in a traceable way. This was, we have seen also this with iConsent. And the upcoming European health data space can build on this by creating this framework for accessing, sharing and using data across EU. And can enhance individual access, also the researchers, but also individuals. And the priority, as we have seen in the discussion, the priority should be harmonization across countries and also systems, harmonization of data, documentation standards, and e-signatures. Another highlight is regarding technical integration, because in the digital consent platform, we have the possibility to trace, also audit and update permissions to primary and secondary data use. And the remote digital systems follow regulatory compliance. And the research advances, but from the point of view of patients, we see that the research advances and technology innovation should reinforce human values such as openness and respect, but never replace it. And the most important thing is the patient perspectives, because we have seen that for patients, what matters is trust and understanding. They don't matter if about the distinction between primary and secondary data use. They feel that they are researchers partners, so we perhaps should push implementation of PPI and education activities for researchers. They they have the need to co-design materials and process and have their preferences taken into account when technicians design web tools. And we should pay also attention to digital inequity, as we have seen also in the discussion and the presentation. We should avoid the digital exclusion, for instance, diverse digital literacy, language skill or disability, and perhaps think about alternative pathway and support, and also promote digital literacy programs. Especially involve patients in the governance of the data process, unifying the consent process and governance for secondary use that would keep patients informed about what happens to their data and why this happens. As regards the future collaborations, I just want to point out that within the CCE DART, we should integrate these workshop findings into the deliverable. We would develop a short video about secondary data use to be hosted in iEnter and expand the pilot study we are running at INT. And beyond the CCE DART, we could contribute to the dialogue with other researchers. So we are, of course, happy to collaborate on electronic informed consent and secondary data use. Perhaps we can go and use other fortunate experience in German, for instance, about others, and participate in a working group on ethical and technical frameworks, create perhaps a repository of good practice and model documents, and last but not the least, participate to other patients' involvement initiatives and projects. And the end of this very nice, and I'm very happy for the workshop. It was very interesting for me, and I hope it was interesting also for the participant. I want to thank all the participants, the speakers, with special thanks to the patients and patient representative. I thank the moderators, Cinzia Colombo, and also I want to thank Cinzia Brunel that is not here, but for her valuable work on CCE DART. And also to the organizers at INT, Sara, Elena, and Abram in particular. And also final thanks to Cancer Core Europe and the DART project collaborators. Thank you. If someone has something to say, you can perhaps, I don't know if Elena wanna say something, or we can close the workshop.
Yes, just say thank you to all the speakers for the quality of all the talks that has been done to this afternoon, and also thank you Rosalba, and thank you also Cinzia for chairing the workshop. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye, and I hope we could collaborate in the future.
Thank you all. Bye.
Goodbye.
Also to the participants. Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much.